All right, good morning. Welcome to part two. Any of you crazy people who are listening to this, of which I'm sure there are a few. So yeah, coming back to this finally. It's been a little while since I did the first part, but I got pulled into other things. I published a few threads on some papers about the mental and physical health consequences of retirement. That was super interesting. I'm doing more reading on the side besides that, so exploring lots of things that I intend to share publicly down the line. So it's all been productive and profitable and interesting. So anyway, I wanted to come back to this. I think where I left off in reviewing my notes was right around here, talking about the fact of there being a lot of unconscious shadow in people, quote, in people who identify as wanting to change the world. I'm just going to read this again. It's very easy to stand in a position and critique the mainstream, but then you're always in a kind of unconscious opposition. And then you're actually avoiding whole parts of your own human nature, which you're probably going to need to make change happen. Wow, that's interesting. That's directly to the point that I was kind of trying to highlight and make in my video reviewing or reflecting on Kendrick's The Heart Part 5, which I just retweeted. Because in that song and in that video especially, Kendrick is doing the opposite of this. He's allowing himself to identify with and embody and take on the face of all of these different people in our culture who get derided and looked down on, or are seen as fucked up in all sorts of different ways. And Kendrick is effectively showing you, like, look, I am also those people. Like, we are all also those people. Let's not pretend like we're so much better than them. Let's realize that we have parts of us who are the exact same way, and own that and integrate that. So Tim is getting at that here, which is that a lot of countercultural people don't do that. They don't do what Kendrick was doing in his song. They don't acknowledge that they themselves also have parts, if you will, if you want to use internal family system language. But like within them, they have the capacity to be the very kinds of people who they hate in the world. You know, greedy, power hungry, aggressive, inconsiderate, all sorts of things. And so, like Tim is saying, they end up standing in opposition and disowning the part of themselves that is like the people that they're fighting against. And so there's a complete inability to empathize. And so it just becomes a battle and a war rather than any kind of attempt to understand and persuade or collaborate, anything like that. So it affects your approach in a very like tactical and strategic way. Like if you see yourself as in total opposition to the other side, you're going to go about dealing with those people in a very different way than you would if you recognize that you yourself also have those qualities within you. And then also on a personal, like subjective side, the intensity with which you feel the need to fight against those forces and those other people is going to be very different if you recognize that those exist within yourself as well. So there's a lot of change that comes with recognizing those parts within yourself. Okay. I don't remember if I read this, so I'll just read it again. So this is Paul now talking about working in strategy consulting. I think so many people are also fighting I think so many people are also fighting that internal battle and kind of resenting the work they're doing, not believing in it. And I felt that powerfully. I think that what I've realized now is I had to kind of disappear for a while and to go save myself and improve my ability to engage with the world and figure out who I am first. Going into the corporate world at 22 and even internships before that, I kind of skipped some psychological developmental stages. Yeah, I don't know that I'll say much about that except that I agree and I relate to that, despite having a very strong worldview leading up to college and after. I then did go straight into the business world and in many ways abandoned much of that worldview that I had before, or tried to abandon it. It was fairly deliberate, to be honest. I had a lot of shame about the worldview that I grew up with. But yeah, in doing that, in jumping into the business world at 22, shoving aside who I was and my worldview and where I came from and my experience and perspective, I do think I also ended up skipping perhaps key developmental stages for sure. All right, so this is Tim again. Intuitively, even before I did any training, for whatever reason, I always just felt that humans have their own path. I am an introverted, feeling reflector type. I like to tune into people, and people are fascinating, and people's inner journey is very meaningful for me. So the reason I say that is because I always take that as kind of primary. And now this is me talking. I relate to that a lot. Within the business world, I've been a marketer, I've been a copywriter, I have worked in finance, and yet the thing that always is interesting to me most is the subjective personal experience of the people I work with, or the people that we're selling to, or even the entrepreneurs that I work with. Business is interesting and marketing is very interesting. I won't deny that, but first and foremost, I'm interested in the individual experience, and the questions I want to ask are about: why are you here? What motivates you? What do you want? How do you feel about this? What do you enjoy about doing the work? The types of questions that have no immediate or obvious relevance to doing the job on a day-to-day basis. Which is why I've progressively realized that what I would much rather be doing is what I have begun doing, which is doing internal family systems work and focusing and identity work with people, running money map sessions. So we can talk about marketing and we can talk about money, but it's through the lens of like, what does it mean to you as a person? And there's no implicit objective or agenda that like we're only talking about this for the sake of like making the next thing happen at your job, right? It's not a side order. It's not a secondary conversation. Like, it is the primary conversation. And through having that conversation, that's the meat of it. That's where the change comes from. It's fun. And you get to learn about yourself, and you get to open up your own eyes to like how you deal with things in your life, rather than being so focused on just the next concrete action, which is just how we often have to be in our day-to-day lives, whether that's in your job or in your business, whatever it is, however it is that you are making a living, or even other parts of life where you just kind of have to be in a rush to get things done, and you don't have time to stop and reflect on what you're doing and why you're doing it, and what it means to you and what you want, So all that to say, I very much relate to Tim, and I'm more and more and more over the past number of years taking that very seriously, rather than trying to diminish that or reject it as being not valuable, which is what I thought for a long time. All right, so reading again. Because of our industrial model of the last 150, 200 plus years, it's like we created this sausage factory, education as a sausage factory, and it's like a template. And the template doesn't really fit everybody. And in some ways, it can't fit everybody. If you're lucky, and there are some people like this, the thing that they love to do is something where money will flow towards it, and the path will more or less map to their own kind of deeper individual or psychological development. But for most people, it's not like that. So there's kind of two separate things here. For one thing, this first part about education, sausage factory template, I think maybe I talked about this in my previous video. But this is something that I believe in a lot. This is like a huge pivotal moment in my life, is when I switched from going to a very alternative education type of school to a more like standard prep school type of place. And that happened when I was fairly young, and it was super jarring going from it felt like 180 degree switch in terms of like what the overall paradigm was about, like what's the purpose of education and why do we learn things, going from a school in which developmental stages were like deeply respected, and as a kid we weren't forced to learn anything that we weren't ready to learn, and our curiosity was respected like to the highest degree. And then on the flip side, moving into a school where it was standardized tests, everyone's kind of just learning because that's what you do to get into AP classes in high school, and then using that to get into a well-known college, so that you can get a big fancy job. And yeah, while I was in high school, I really fucking rebelled against that. I really, it was so, learning to me is important, and not for the sake of just getting to the next step of the conveyor belt. So I was really frustrated to be in an education environment in which just accelerating on the conveyor belt was the primary objective. So kind of most of my life, this idea of education as an industrial model type of thing has been very key, very influential in my thinking about things. So then there's a second part, which I feel like maybe doesn't make tons of sense yet. Maybe it'll probably make more sense later with other things that Tim says. But yeah, so it kind of getting at this idea that like if you choose to not just go on the conveyor belt path, if you don't fit yourself into the template, then you could really end up going anywhere, right? You're following your own path, you're following your own life path, or as Paul would describe it, your pathless path. And what Tim is highlighting is that like when you do that and you're really doing it in a genuine way, and really following whatever it is that you're called to follow, that doesn't always lead to making money. Like the things that you're called to do, the things that you want to do, however you want to describe it, whether it's your calling or you're just following your impulse or your curiosity or what have you, that's not always going to lead to financial or profit creating endeavors. And sometimes it will, but like it's not a guarantee. So there's that saying, follow your passion and the money will follow. That's not exactly how it goes. Something to that effect, right? Do what you love and the money will follow. Like, it sounds really nice, but it's not 100% true at all. Like, you could do what you love and no one could ever know about it, or very few people could ever know about it. And money is not guaranteed. And the thing about that saying is that it's still very much within the paradigm of thinking about everything you do as being for the sake of earning money. It's like, basically it's like, instead of doing something that sucks, something that you hate, some boring job for the sake of money, you don't have to do a shitty thing for the sake of money. You can do what you love. And actually, you do what you love and the money will follow, but you're still doing it for the sake of money. Or you're like justifying it with money. You're justifying doing what you love with money, right? If you remove the money will follow part, it becomes a lot less sexy of a statement. Just like, do what you love and who knows what'll happen. Right? That's not gonna motivate people quite as much. So yeah, I will move on from that. So I believe this is Paul again speaking. The default path is that it's a story and it's become so strong because of how successful it has been in creating wealth for individual families, individuals and societies. And then I think this is Tim, but we also have to deal with the tremendous amount of damage. Oh, no, this is Paul. We also have to deal with the tremendous amount of damage and the ignoring of the shadow of previous generations. Tim is going to say more about this further down, but with this here, like, it's interesting, having put out those notes on the retirement stuff lately and really digging into a lot of retirement industry and retirement history stuff over the last many months. Our idea of retirement is so, like, it's so baked in to our idea of life. Like, we take it for granted. And we have this idea that, like, it's a normal thing for people to be able to retire with, like, lots of money and then just live out the rest of their days relaxing. But like if you think about, or if you realize, if you study the history of this, retirement as an idea has not existed for more than several hundred years, really. It's a very modern phenomenon. And then like the two most popular, well-known, most used financial products or financial accounts for retirement are no more than like 150 years old, really. So pensions were started along with like the first really big corporations in the United States, the railroads and like telephone companies in the 1850s roughly, because they suddenly had way more money and they had way more employees than like any other kinds of companies ever before. And they had a responsibility to like take care of those employees to some degree. So pensions were created. There's a lot more details about that. That was a radical oversimplification, but pensions, started mid 1800s roughly. Here we are in 2023. Pensions are pretty much done. You can't join a job nowadays and get a pension. Public pensions are more a thing because, again, it takes a huge organization that has lasted much longer and has a much more stable financial status to be able to provide a pension, because the pension is guaranteed money. So the government can do that, but startups can't really do that. Startups don't know what the fuck's going to happen in 5 years. So public pensions are certainly more of a thing, but private pensions that's not really a thing anymore. Over the last 20 plus years, I know growing up, becoming an adult in this time, it's something that I've heard over and over and over about people losing their pensions being defaulted, companies having all sorts of complications where they actually don't have enough money to pay out people the pension money that they were promised after all. So you hear about these people who have like been banking on this idea that they would get a guaranteed pension at the end of their career, their whole life, and then suddenly they're in their 60s and they don't have anything. So here we are, 150 years later from like the first real retirement-related financial product, and it's gone, pretty much. And then you have 401ks, which have become so baked into our society. Like, who questions 401ks? Like, that's just, like, everyone has one, right? I mean, not everyone has one, I know that, that's the point. But we hardly blink an eye about 401ks. They're pretty standard financial account. And yet, 401ks were only invented in 1978. So that's what? 20, 40, 45 years. They're 45 years old. So most of our parents did not grow up with 401ks existing. Most of our parents only probably got a 401k in their mid-20s, if not later. And yet we're banking on 401ks and we treat them as normal, but they're not. They're incredibly new, and the amount of people who actually have them is incredibly small relative to the amount of people in general, overall, in the country or in the world, right? So these retirement schemes, these retirement products are extremely new. They disappear relatively quickly, And the amount of people that get them is actually very, very small. If you look into the statistics about how many people actually have 401ks in the United States, it's pretty abysmal. And that's probably a good thing for me to dig into more and share on Twitter. I've already read a bunch of papers on that, but like, it's incredible how many people in the United States don't even have bank accounts or credit history, or even the ability to have a credit history, let alone have a retirement account. So the idea that a 401k in a retirement is normal is like super delusional, really. Like, it's a very, very, very small portion of the population who has been able to have that, let alone have one that is well funded enough to actually like allow them to retire in a really like relaxed way. And the time span in which that's been possible is extremely small, right? Like, again, with 401ks, we're talking about 45 years that they've existed. So we're talking about an extremely small portion of overall population within a window of 45 years. Like, that is nothing. So anyway, that's a little rant about retirement. Shall I keep going? This is getting into some bigger questions about, Tim brings up questions about pushing back on Paul's point about this industrial model having created a lot of wealth. And to maybe paraphrase it, it's like, yes, it has, but primarily it has for an extremely small portion of the world population overall. So let's be careful about generalizing this idea that the past 200 years of business has raised all the boats, because it's definitely raised the boats for certain people by a lot, but in many other cases, like, it's very arguable that it hasn't. So I think I'll stop here. Cool. Until next time, have a wonderful day, have a wonderful life, and I'll talk to you later.